All right, today we're doing something a little different. We're not just digging into history or data. We're jumping headfirst into a really fascinating thought experiment. What would a New York City run by a democratic socialist mayor actually look like? We're going to explore that very question through a series of imagined roundtable discussions.
So here's the big what if. The premise is simple, but so powerful. What if Zohran Mamdani, who's a real-life progressive assembly member, actually won an 8-year term as mayor? Now, this isn't about predicting the future. It's really about exploring the core ideas and tensions that would define an era like that. The source material calls it a journey into New Yorktopia.
So, to get our heads around this alternate reality, we're going to navigate through 3 key battlegrounds. First, the clash over public safety and budgets. Then, the tension between business and equality. And finally, the fight for the city's cultural soul. After all that, we'll get to the imagined verdict on this whole 8-year experiment.
Our story kicks off with this idea of New Yorktopia. It's described as a city that runs not just on ambition, but on intention. A place where, and I love this line from the source, policy comes with a punchline. So this first section is all about that initial optimistic rush of the experiment and then the inevitable collision with the hard realities of actually governing.
So how do we even begin to understand this fictional era? Well, by looking at the core debates that are imagined to have shaped it. And these aren't just dry policy discussions, right? They're presented as arguments over the very soul of the city. We get to see these big progressive ideals clash head-on with urban reality, all through the voices of a really diverse panel of characters created for this thought experiment.
Let's dive into our first major area of conflict. This is where the rubber really meets the road: public safety and the city budget. It perfectly frames that fundamental tension between taking a compassionate approach to social problems and the cold, hard fiscal reality of having to pay for it all.
And this is the central question that really kicks off the whole debate, isn't it? It's provocative, and it's absolutely essential. Is empathy a real tool for creating order, or is it just a liability when you're confronting crime? Let's see how the different voices here tackle this one.
Now, what's so interesting about this slide is how clearly it lays out the 2 opposing poles of this argument. On one side, you've got the fictional Mayor Mamdani, arguing that true safety is really about dignity, addressing the root causes like poverty and mental health. On the other side, you've got the conservative commentator Evelyn Rant, who argues for a much more direct approach. Her whole point is you can't substitute hugs for handcuffs. For her, safety is all about enforcement and consequences.
But this debate isn't just a simple binary. A third voice, Rabbi David Klein, comes in and introduces a really crucial point of balance. He argues that his community wants both compassion and order. His perspective just brilliantly illustrates this need for a middle path, where mercy is supported by structure so it doesn't just descend into chaos.
Of course, all these programs cost money, which leads us to the next big clash: math versus morality. The moral case, championed by Mamdani, says, yeah, fairness isn't free, but we can afford it by reprioritizing our wealth. But the fiscal case, voiced by critics, warns that this kind of plan just punishes success and drives capital away. As one character puts it, you can't pay for ideals with emotional accounting.
And that whole debate over the city's budget flows naturally into our next theme, that classic tension between enterprise and equality. Who gets to build the city, and who really benefits from all its growth?
This quote from Mamdani is absolutely key to his whole argument. He totally reframes the debate. He's saying, look, I'm not anti-business, I'm anti-exploitation. For him, it's not about being pro or anti-business in general, it's about being against a specific kind of business model, one that's built on exploiting its workers. This really shifts the focus from capitalism itself to the ethics of how it's practiced.
And naturally, there's a really strong counterargument. Critics like Evelyn Grant fear that this mindset just demonizes success itself. They worry that trying to engineer fairness through regulation is just going to lead to economic paralysis, capital flight to places like Florida, and ultimately, it'll suffocate the very innovation that makes a city thrive.
But what if this isn't about killing growth, but redefining it? The urban policy expert Dr. Lila Moreno introduces a data-driven alternative. She suggests that smart regulation doesn't have to kill creativity, it can actually channel it. And this slide shows her point perfectly, showing how an economy focused on equality could foster entirely new kinds of enterprise, like worker co-ops and green startups that actually serve society, not just the shareholders.
So we've moved from economics, and now we're pivoting to the cultural and social soul of the city. This section explores those deeply personal and often really contentious issues of identity, faith, and inclusion. How does a city even build a sense of belonging when its population is constantly changing and its values are always up for debate?
To anchor this whole discussion, Rabbi Klein introduces this powerful concept, tikkun olam, which means repairing the world. Now, this isn't just a religious idea. It's used here as a philosophical framework for civic responsibility. It suggests that our duty is to actively mend what is broken in society through empathy and through taking concrete action.
And this brings us to one of the most pressing debates of our time, framed here as a very direct question. Can a city uphold that moral imperative to be a sanctuary for newcomers while also managing the very real practical strains on its resources, everything from hospitals to shelters?
Dr. Moreno provides a data-driven answer to that exact question. Her perspective is that immigration is really a two-act story. As this chart visualizes, there's an undeniable short-term strain on city services, but the data overwhelmingly shows that this initial investment leads to much greater long-term economic growth, as immigrants contribute more in taxes over time and revitalize communities.
But even with all that data, the emotional question is still there. Who gets priority? Evelyn Grant voices the citizens' first perspective, arguing that a government's primary duty is to those who are already there. Mamdani counters that this is a false choice. He argues for a more inclusive sense of belonging, seeing newcomers as already part of the collective us, and that inclusion actually strengthens rather than dilutes the community.
So, after 8 years of this thought experiment, of navigating all these intense debates over safety, money, and belonging, what's the final verdict? Was this imagined New Yorktopia a success, or was it a failure?
The conclusion offered by the source's narrator is that the experiment's true legacy wasn't about achieving some perfect outcome. The crucial point is this: success was measured in participation. The city survived. Sure, it was bruised, but also brilliant, and still arguing. It learned to fail better, embracing its identity as a proud, loud, and eternally unfinished project.
And this just illustrates this central theme so perfectly. The result of this 8-year experiment wasn't heaven or hell. It was something uniquely its own, New Yorktopia, a messy, vibrant, chaotic, and aspirational city that fully embraced its own contradictions.
And that leaves us with a final question to consider. After exploring these clashes between compassion and control, enterprise and equality, what really is the true measure of a city's wealth? Is it the height of its skyscrapers, or is it the strength of its social fabric? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.